Just gone 8 o'clock on this Thursday morning. You're watching or listening to OTB AM. Andy Dunn is the voice you've just been listening to. He was speaking on last night's show. Great interview with Joe Malloy. The full piece available now on the OTB Podcast Network, on the brand new OTB Sports app, and on youtube.com/off the ball as well. Plenty more rugby coming up later on as well. After 9 o'clock, we've got Keith Wood's State of the Union. Schools and domestic rugby, Ger, I think, is up for discussion.
Yeah, so we've done international. We've been down speaking with Michael Cheika and Andrew Mertens, you got to mention there. And we also obviously had Philip Brown last week. We've done the commercial stuff. We've done the strength of the club game in England and how that's really one of the big dominoes that still has to fall in terms of what's going to happen next in the whole CVC relationship. So we figured we'd talk about the role that the AIL has and the role that the schools have. And Johnny Murphy has obviously just taken Newbridge College to the Leinster Schools Cup final. Obviously they're going to share that because the game ended up being cancelled when lockdown happened, and he talks in depth about just the resources that the schools have, and they in Newbridge they have fairly phenomenal resources when he lists them off, but he said that they would kind of be considered a developmental school in terms of not being at the same level of resources as some of the big powerhouse schools who traditionally would be winning the Leinster Schools Cup and would traditionally be providing the backbone of the Leinster team and subsequently the Ireland team, as we've seen in recent years. And so when he begins to go through that level of detail, and it's for the junior team and the senior team, you realise that there's a massive industry in schools coaching. And then you just park that thought for a moment and you go, that's not something that Leinster or the IRFU actually have to pay for. It's a really phenomenal farm system that is essentially paid for, and partly by the state, in that the teachers of all of the schools that are private are funded by the taxpayer, but it's the extracurricular activities then that the parents are paying for. And rugby essentially seems to be one of the biggest benefactors in Irish civil society, from wealthy parents who are sending their kids to private schools. And that's a very interesting dynamic to think about. Like the club game, on the other hand, Leinster spend a good bit of time and effort and money and brain power in trying to get the club game up to a level where that will begin to provide a pathway for players. So we get a bit of the detail on that too. And it is really interesting to see exactly how well run rugby is and how it benefits from this ecosystem, which is fairly symbiotic. The other thing that I think we should talk about briefly is that if you're an absolutely brilliant youth player, there's a very good chance that you'll come to the notice of one of the schools who are competing for the Leinster Schools Cup. So, not always, but a lot of those players who are playing representative, and there's a series of representative areas that you play in the youth system if you're not in the school. And if you're really good in those, you're getting access to play against the school teams that they organise matches. But then a lot of those end up in the school system anyway because they get picked off or they get offered scholarships or they get brought over for Leaving Cert year. So it's a real, I didn't really know exactly how the whole thing worked. And it's great to have somebody who's on the inside of it just to explain exactly how it works. And then on the other side, Stephen Rooney is Director of Rugby at Lansdowne and is talking about the difficulties that the club game, the elite club game faces and what role there should be. While we were on the call yesterday, recording that piece, one of his players had actually just signed a deal with Connacht. So we don't talk specifically about the fact that it is a pathway into the professional game if it's used properly for that individual, but we do talk about that as a concept.
And then what about the club game as a standalone thing? Is there hope for that? Is that the sense you're getting from these conversations? Because it's always getting a bit of a battering in this way. Like, of course, there have been stories and good news stories about people, as you say, getting picked up by provinces. But in terms of being its own sustainable thing that people are interested in, is there light at the end of that tunnel at all?
I think that's the point of the conversation. You have to decide what you want to do with it, and everybody has to row in behind that. So they were talking about, Johnny Murphy made the point, if you're in the school system and you're on your senior cup team, you're getting noticed as a rugby player. But then when you leave sixth year and go and join a club team, no one pays any attention to it. So there's no sense of this being part of the pathway. If you don't get picked up by the academy, for example, you end up being lost essentially, and there's not much to attract you to the clubs. Bear in mind that schools players aren't allowed to play with their clubs. So that link is broken from the time that they're essentially 13 to the time that they're 18. And then you could be the 10th best player on St. Michael's, say, or Blackrock or any of those big schools and not get a Leinster contract. And the rugby system hasn't quite worked out the best way to keep you involved. And the club is the obvious answer, right? So putting a system in place that allows the clubs to use those players and still have them be part of the wider Leinster system. We're talking about the late bloomers here. We're talking about players who might have been injured in fifth and sixth year who are coming through. You would expect that at some point they might get a chance, but unless that kind of relationship is structurally formalized structurally, then it seems like there's a missed opportunity, and there's also like a lack of certainty about what you actually want from these teams. Because the other thing was the AIL is amateur. I didn't realise this either, that unless you're a contracted Leinster or Munster or Connacht player and sent back to play a couple of games to get over your ring rustiness or whatever, then you are supposed to not be being paid to play in the league. So it's just interesting to kind of get a full understanding of exactly what the relationship between these different strands are. And it feels like they haven't quite worked out, 25 years in professionalism, what the specific role of the club is and how to support the club in providing a level of competition that is one step below the provincial academy, or is one step above the provincial academy, or one step below the whatever that B&I Cup used to be.
Yeah, well, plenty of stuff to get into there after 9 o'clock. Should be an interesting chat. All of Keith Wood's State of the Union totally worth your time going back into the Rugby and Off the Ball podcast or onto YouTube to watch all of those back. And hopefully it's a time for rugby to actually analyse all this and make the required changes that might be needed. One of the other stories Jerry wanted to touch on this morning is about the white paper published by StatSports, the Irish company who've been pretty vital in terms of supplying data to the Premier League in terms of Project Restart. Essentially, they're taking data from GPSs worn by players in inter-county football and in club football and finding out basically how close they are to other players and for how long are they within a 2 metre proximity of them. It's carried in the Irish Times this morning, good piece by Malachy Clerkin in there. And just a couple of the pieces of information that come out from it, from StatSports. Gaelic footballers are spending an average of 2.5 seconds in the proximity of other players during matches, which is a remarkably low number when I initially look at it, but it's especially low when you consider that soccer is at 3.3 seconds. There are higher incursion rates in training, which is obviously another sign of hope because it's easier to control. And the longest time spent between two players was 58 seconds from the range of matches that they looked at from their data of games. And as Clerkin points out in his piece, that's probably from a particularly sticky/mouthy cornerback marking a corner forward. I would have thought it was longer than 58 seconds, the longest time spent between two players. I certainly expected the average to be way above 2.5 seconds. It's not the be-all and end-all of this, and StatSports will say that themselves, but it's quite hopeful to see these numbers.
Yeah, I think if you trace this back, StatSports obviously provided this for the Premier League, and that was one of the pieces of information that the Premier League used to convince the players to go back. And if you think back to how all the conversations that the GAA have been having it's a contact sport. Contact has been one of the big things that Tony Holohan has been talking about since the very start of this. How can we go back into contact sport? And actually, it's not contact in the definition of the World Health Organization. They're very specific medical terms. And again, NFLV was pointing that out too. So I think this is just a bit of information where the science is fairly phenomenal that StatSports have been able to dig into here, and the reams of data they have gone back over such a long period of time. Really clever guys, a really brilliant Irish company who have made it on the global stage, and the fact that they're able to produce this, I think, is really helping with what's coming. So you can see Shane Stapleton had a piece yesterday which had loads of great detail about on the Our Game platform. Which had loads of great stuff about the return to play. And bits of other return to play stories have leaked out, but he reckons that there's a good chance we're going to see inter-county sooner rather than later, that it won't be the original November deadline, and that we could see action July, August time at club level. The only way that you're going to get to that point is if there's comfort given to players and administrators, and the only way you're going to get comfort is if there's science. And the science that StatSports have provided has given everybody an opportunity and cover to say, well, actually, you know what? Maybe we could start doing the things that everybody else around the world are doing. And if we're slow about it and cautious about it, and they have been very slow and they have been very cautious, then we might see games in the autumn time of high caliber and meaningful quality.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm all for somebody taking the more cautious approach in these times, and that's exactly what the GAA did. And to go back to what John Horan said that night in the Sunday game, he said that there is a chance that we can move this back, but we can also move it forward. And it's looking increasingly likely from Stapleton's piece in our game that there is going to be a pushing forward of the inter-county calendar to the point where you could have inter-county action in September. We might actually go straight to Sheahan Hannon, who's with us this morning at 8:10 on OTB AM, because I think you're leading with this story, Sheahan.
Yeah, absolutely. This certainly the big story of the morning, Eoin and Ger. Positive news for GAA fans for sure, but the GAA looks set to begin the county championships, as you've mentioned, in August, and bin the Provincial and All-Ireland Club Series for 2020-21. As you said, Shane Stapleton has the story in our game this morning, with inter-county championships looking like starting in September. So a little bit earlier than any of us had really expected. The association looks set to ratify a return-to-play roadmap drawn up by their COVID-19 advisory group. So that's the big news emerging this morning. Some soccer as well for you this morning. Premier League clubs will discuss today what would happen if the season is curtailed by the pandemic. They'll debate scenarios to finalise the league table if the campaign cannot be completed, but the potential for scrapping relegation is not expected to be on the agenda. Clubs could also vote on the possible use of neutral venues for some games. It's expected a fixture list for the opening few weeks of the restarted season will be finalised this afternoon. An individual from Tottenham Hotspur was the only positive test from the Premier League's latest round of coronavirus screening. It's not known if it is a player or indeed a member of staff, but they will likely miss the first round of fixtures as they go into quarantine for 14 days. The new Scottish Premiership season, meanwhile, is set to start in August. Matches are likely to be held behind closed doors, but every game will be on television. Meanwhile, the SPFL has written to clubs to ask what it would take for them to back a 14-man top flight, so it's all change. Bohemians says it was an error for two groups of 3 of their players and a coach to take part in a training session in the same place. Pictures of the session at Father Collins Park in Donamead in Dublin emerged on social media yesterday. Bows insist social distancing was observed, but say they will ensure only one group of 3 players will now meet in a single venue until collective training resumes on the 8th of June. Some golf. Team USA captain Steve Stricker has become the latest voice to speak out against the prospect of a behind closed doors Ryder Cup event this year. Padraig Harrington's European team are due to play Stricker's team at Whistling Straits in September, though Rory McIlroy is among the players to call for postponement if fans aren't allowed to attend. Stricker says it would be a crime to play without fans at the Wisconsin course. He also added it would likely reduce the event to a yawn fest. Mercedes chief Toto Wolff says he hopes to finalise a new contract with Lewis Hamilton pretty soon. The current Formula 1 World Champions deal is set to run out at the end of the season. Wolff also admits that they're monitoring the situation of Sebastian Vettel, who is due to become a free agent in December. He, of course, leaving Ferrari. So that would be a fascinating switch if they were to pit Vettel up against Hamilton, 2 of the greatest drivers, of course, of this era. Newcastle United have been criticised by their fans for not communicating their plans for season tickets. The Supporters Trust has also asked the club for confirmation of refunds, as all the remaining home games will be played behind closed doors. Meanwhile, football journalist Michael Delaney joined off the ball last night to discuss what is holding up the purchase of Newcastle by a Saudi Arabian-based consortium and why that delay may influence the Premier League's thinking on the matter. Really good stuff, as always, from Miguel. That full piece is up this morning on otbsports.com and indeed the new OTB Sports app, which is live for download in the Play Store and App Store right now. And finally, from me this morning, lads, some basketball news. The NBA will meet with the National Basketball Players Association later to discuss proposals to resume the season with 22 teams next month. They hope to play 8 games at the Disney campus near Orlando in July to decide the teams to progress to the postseason playoffs. The plans would see the playoffs commence in August with the finals in October.
Sheahan Hannon, great stuff. Chat to you soon.
Thanks, lads.
Sheahan Hannon there on the line this morning. Let's tell you what's coming up over the next little while on OTB AM. The sports page is coming your way in just a sec. We've got Gina Akpamoses and Joseph Ojawumi with us later on at around 25 to 9. Michael Fenley will also be with us at 10 to 9 to chat about how he's been spending lockdown so far, and Keith Wood's State of the Union, as we've already mentioned, coming your way at 10 past 9. We've got domestic and schools rugby up for debate this morning. Johnny Murphy and Steve Rooney will be alongside Ger and Keith. Time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
Starting with otbsports.com. Leading the way this morning is Kelly Harrington and her quotes from last night. "I've the feet up with chocolate and biscuits." Kelly Harrington is all of us. She on the show last night. She says, I'm going to Dunn's this evening. I'll probably buy a large Cadbury's fruit and nut bar, a large Maltesers bar and a packet of biscuits. Once one of those bars gets opened, it's gone in the day. There is no stopping me until it's gone. A day, like if I could last a day with that sort of menu, I'd be doing well. It's usually an hour or two for me personally, but good to see we're kind of on the same level at this point with elite athletes, Ger.
You are essentially an elite athlete, is what I'm hearing here.
Well, like without question, the diet of champions is what I'm at, really, when I look at that. So, elsewhere on OTB Sports this morning, we've got human rights versus TV rights. What's holding up the Saudi takeover? As Shane mentioned already, that was from Miguel Delaney on the Football Show last night. It took me years to recognise he was bang on the money then. That's a quote from Andy Dunn. And we've got OTB AM and Bohemians admit error with Father Collins Park training session and that Formula 1 story as well. So that's otbsports.com right now, and the brand new OTB app is where you can get all your favourite OTB content in one place right now.
The Irish Independent this morning, Bows admit error after training video emerges. It's that same story. I think Bows were doing what a lot of clubs are doing. It's just that they happen to be doing it simultaneously. I think a lot of GA teams around the country have been training in 3s and 4s. Ross, no return for FAI Oldguard is the headline on that story there. And Springbok duo game changers for Munster, says Habana. Brian Habana has been talking about the two lads who are going to fetch up in August and ultimately completely change Munster from one of the teams who were very close to being one of the best teams in Europe to essentially they should be now one of the best teams in Europe.
The Irish Examiner this morning leads with Eoin Cormacan's piece that Kerry club games will be pay-per-view as €400,000 loss looms. So this is interesting. The live streaming of Kerry fixtures, whenever the GAA sanctions a return to games activity, will be pay-per-view. This is according to their county chairman, Tim Murphy. He says, irrespective of restrictions on crowd capacity, Kerry County Board will charge a small subscription fee to watch county championship games online. The reason for this is obvious. They're going to face a pretty big loss to the tune of €400,000, according to this piece, if the remainder of the season provides a write-off. This is interesting, isn't it, that club games would go behind a paywall immediately?
Yeah. Like, will there be an outcry about this, or does everybody accept, actually, these are games that, you know, I won't be able to see otherwise, and we're going to pay for them? Maybe this is exactly where the GAA needs to go. Like, can you imagine paying $9.99 a month and being able to watch the Kerry Championship, the Dublin Championship, the Kildare Championship, the Donegal Championship? Would that make sense? And the money gets shared, pooled centrally?
I think if you're parting with money to go into a club ground, you realise that there is a commitment you're making to the game in that county or wherever it is. You are supporting grassroots GAA by paying into a club ground. This is possibly the same thing. It is the same idea. It is the same place where your money will be ending up.
And so, to play devil's advocate, how is that any different from an inter-county match going behind a paywall?
It's a good point. It's a good point. Like, that is up to what the GAA do with that money. You're talking about Sky Sports. You're talking about the advent of pay-per-view GAA, and if that is going to be met with outcry, will this be met with the same backlash? Is that your point?
Well, it clearly isn't going to be met with a backlash, because everybody understands that the reason this is happening is, one, you're not allowed to have fans at games, so putting them on TV is the best thing to do. And two, they need to be able to pay for that service. And three, they need to raise funds. So if there is a backlash, I'll be amazed. Sorry, I should expect there to be a backlash. I won't be surprised that some people will have an issue with this, but it makes perfect sense. I'm just wondering, if you're ascribing a value to something, and this is an old argument at this point, which, you know, seems to have been thrashed out as and beaten like the dead horse that it is. But isn't there a point where you go, there's a value to this, we need to ascribe a value to that and then decide what that is and then fairly price it up so that people can access it? We charge to go to matches. No matter what the game is, we charge in the GAA to go to games. And there should be a charge to watch that game, because there's a value to that as opposed to it being given away for free. And I think that has been established now at intercounty level, and it should be established. This should be an opportunity for the county boards to produce really good quality. When you look at the quality of cameras that are available now and the quality of broadcast systems that are available now, you'll actually be able to really sit and watch and enjoy most of these games at a level that 5 years ago was completely off the charts. And that in 3 or 4 years' time, when everything improves again, it's going to be fairly close to the broadcast that we were watching 10 years ago from 24 cameras in a satellite truck.
Just two things here.
I'd pay $9.99 for that.
I think a lot of people would agree with you, but just 2 points on that. First of all, this county board has form in actually realising the value of their club games. I'm not sure if you remember last year, they wouldn't allow, I can't remember, was it one of the county semi-finals or one of the county finals to not be aired on TG Cahir because they wanted people to actually show up to the game and pay their money to actually go and see it. So the process of doing that is not too dissimilar. But also the second point here is that the backlash will definitely be checked by the fact that this is a necessity, that you've got the €400,000 hole here, and you can easily make a case that this is not our ideology to put games behind a paywall online, but it has to be our ideology for us to stay afloat.
Yeah, look, exactly on the second point. On the first point, I'm sure there was a bit of politicking going on there between who actually owns the rights to the county matches, because I know that they get sold centrally and yet the counties feel that they should be getting all the revenue from them. So they don't like the fact that those games are on TV because they believe, rightly or wrongly, that they're not seeing enough of the funding coming from the Central GAA. Now, Central GAA would make the argument very well that all of the money they make essentially gets distributed back right around the country. So counties sometimes should just suck it up for the greater good. But it turns out we're not very good at that in Irish sport, Eoin.
No, it doesn't seem that way. Just a couple of other things from the Irish Examiner. Kerry Secretary O'Regan adds voice as FAI regime faces battle. This is an FAI council member, John O'Regan, who's basically echoed the concerns of Nixon Morton by insisting only intervention by FIFA will prevent civil war erupting at committee level. So he's the veteran secretary of the Kerry District League who represents the Munster FA on council. He is one of almost 30 legislators on the brink of being forced out under the terms of the state's bailout deal. It's a good piece by John Fallon this morning. Some strong quotes from O'Regan. Football decisions should be taken by football people. The GAA wouldn't get away with being run by people without knowledge of the sport. That's why they are so strong in the community, and I'd fear for soccer if we went away from that. I am democratically elected annually to council, yet we have a minister who was voted out by his constituency in the last election, casting football people aside. I think that the whole Sheahan Ross situation is irking a lot of people in the FAI at the moment, to say the least, especially people who've been around for quite some time. It'll be very interesting if there is a new sports minister over the next couple of months, whether or not there will be a rollback on the term limits or when the term limit rule needs to actually be implemented. The other two stories then leading the way on the Irish Examiner. Eoin Merchant's been out doing the rounds talking about his unbelievable goal last year. Hard for Lane to count steps on final winning goal is the headline here in the Examiner. Tough for Conor Lane to have known if he took too many steps. And Naas confidence.
What do you think of that, Eoin?
I think.
What do you think of that, Eoin?
It is tough for any referee to count those steps. Why would you take such an unbelievable goal away from a kid like that? What a moment for him. And Naas confident it can lead successful racing return. Naas Racecourse, primed for the return of Irish racing on Monday afternoon, and racecourse manager Eamon McAvoy is confident of a positive experience. So that's the Examiner. Plenty happening there this morning.
Yeah, I think, if you remember, you think back to when it was announced that racing was going to be coming back at the start of June, there was definitely some people going, oh, that's too soon. Now it's like, Jesus, that's exactly the right time to be coming back, right? There's a sense that, one, they've got the experience of doing the 10 days at the end behind closed doors. They've ramped up their precautions, and it feels like we're absolutely ready to have some more return to normality and racing happening next week. Feels about right now.
Yeah, I saw someone making this point over the last couple of days that no matter what stance you took on return to play, you were probably going to be wrong. And I put that wrong at one time or another. So people were pointing the finger at the Bundesliga before it came back, saying this is ridiculous, this is inhumane, there's no way that the Bundesliga or any competitive sport should be coming back, regardless of no fans behind closed doors. Fair play to Ligue 1 for ending their season. And then all of a sudden, now here we are, Ligue 1 are trying to reverse their decision to have actually called off the season, and everybody's like, fair play to the Bundesliga, paving the way for everybody in Europe. So no matter what stance you took, at one point or another, you would have been wrong, and everybody is a broken clock, it turns out, eventually.
As Monty Burns would say, cheese-eating surrender monkeys. Breakfast proves a great start for East Belfast Club is the headline on the Sports Thursday section of the Irish Times. This is a story about a new GAA club being set up in East Belfast, across the barricades. A love story that could only be involved in the administration of an amateur sports organisation. A new proximity study provides shot in the arm for return to action. Owen's already talked about that. That's Michael Clerkin's story about the Stat Sports white paper that's helping to convince people that a return to GAA action is something that we can do this year. And let's get on with it because it's going to be good. Merchant, wrong player in the right place at right time. It turned out he was the right player in the right place at the right time because obviously that was the sliding doors moment. That was the moment of the game, Eoin. That was the moment that your little Kerry Hart died, right?
When we
didn't spend enough time in this goal. We haven't spent enough time in this. Go on.
I was in a different continent when it happens, thankfully. It was when we do our classic game club on this game in years to come, it'll be moment of the match. Well, Owen Merchant, obviously. What else is there? Like we're doing Ireland-England 07 in rugby this week, and it's like Shane Horgan's try, obviously. What else is there? Like Owen Merchant's moment is on that level and instantly memorable. You know it's going to be talked about for a long, long time. And because of the fact that he is a cornerback, you know for a fact that it will be his moment that we talk about for a long, long time. When like Bernard Brogan when he scored a goal in the 2013 final, you were like, well, it's hard to select between all the great Brogan moments. But for Merchant, this is his career moment, defined already. It's so young in his career too.
I don't know if it was made of the insult that was paid to Bernard Brogan and where he came in that top 20 footballers of Dublin. Like,
where did he finish?
I can't even remember, but it was nowhere near high enough. Bernard and Alan Brogan should have been way higher up. It was almost as if there was like, well, sure, look, what have they done? What really has this team done, you know, with all the advantages that they have versus the team of the 70s and early 80s? Like, come on now.
I don't think there was an outfield Dublin player in the top 5 of the Leinster over the last 50 years. Was it 50 years? Which is remarkable, really, but it also shows the strength of Stephen Cluxton and how he's almost become the unanimous decision for the best dub of all time. The London Times is where I'm going to next. West Indies trio refused to tour England. 3 West Indies players, they've refused to be part of the squad to tour England for the 3 test matches next month because of concerns over coronavirus. Martin Ziegler then says a third of games on free-to-air. Amazon have now confirmed that it would make its 4 matches free-to-air, so that's 30 in total in the UK anyway. The Premier League matches will be free. And Adidas scraps £20 million Ozil deal. Adidas has decided not to renew Mesut Ozil's sponsorship deal, worth about £20 million over the past 7 years. The German company is instead looking to focus on the next generation of stars. So his boot deal with Adidas expires next month. His association with the company dates back to 2013 when he was at Real Madrid. He switched from Nike and secured a fairly lucrative contract. But Adidas done with Mesut Ozil.
It's a lot of cash, isn't it?
Over 7 years, yeah, it obviously is. I thought it was 20 million per year when I saw it first, and I thought that was fairly jaw-dropping, but it is 20 million over 7 years. Just to wear a pair of boots, says you, it's fairly good money. So he'd been photographed wearing boots with the logo blacked out recently, so it's obviously been in the pipeline for some time. So it had been suggested in Germany that his public image was a factor behind the decision as well, which is something you probably need to dig a little bit deeper into.
Yeah. All right. The Mirror Sport this morning. Let's hear it for the noise. TV fans will decide whether they want crowd sounds or not when the Prem kicks off again. Let's hear it for the Troy. Troy Deeney's return to training is a massive boost for struggling Watford. And they also have Bow Way Have We Broken Rules, except that they actually have broken the rules, obviously. Lockdown may help own goal is Owen Merchant, as we were talking about a little bit earlier on. Also, their stats, just what GAA needed for our return, is the white paper from Stat Sports saying that, come on, let's get it on. Let's get it on.
The Irish Sun this morning. Why are you taking our cash? Toon grab season ticket debits early. No crowd, but no Black Cats refund. That is the back of the Sun. Deliver Blue then. Chelsea's Meals on Wheels. Chelsea are feeding their players on the go in the bid to get them into shape for the start of the season, or the restart of the season. There's Owen Merchant as well on his wonder goal. Prem are tackling problems, meanwhile, writes Martin Lipton. Prem club bosses will be under pressure to sort out the remaining project restart rows today. So it's D-Day number 1045, it feels, at this point. Every Thursday or every Friday, there's another significant meeting. Today is one of those. It's safety race for big guns then. English top-flight teams are in a race against time to gain safety certificates they need to be able to resume the season. The delay in finalising the fixtures for the project restart means all 20 teams are yet to apply for new licences to stage matches. So a couple of wrinkles to be ironed out from the Premier League's perspective. That is the Irish Sun.
I got the star for you next, and that is 5 in a row goal. Hasn't changed me. Dublin's own Merchant, Minister and FAI at loggerheads. We've already covered that story. That's Shane Ross versus the FAI Old Guard. Tottenham positive is the only negative. Is a story of a picture of Jose Mourinho, that player who they're saying isn't that important. It's an interesting detail to allow to leak out. So there you are, going about your business, training, thinking maybe I'm going to get a chance in the team. All of a sudden, you get coronavirus. You're like, oh, this is pretty bad. And then the news leaks out that actually you're not that important. Like, who said I wasn't that important? It can't be anybody else. They're literally talking about one player. So whoever's briefing on behalf of Spurs that this player isn't particularly important, that player needs to get on to his agent fairly quickly. And the back page of the Star this morning is Naughty Bows. Gypsy said to avoid rap despite breaching FAI guidelines on training sessions. So there won't be any repercussions for Bows for their training session.
If you were a team threatened with relegation, you would say this player who is tested positive is our most important player, wouldn't you? You'd be like, this is a scandal that we're coming back to play. It's a very valuable player, unnamed guy, number one, who has contracted the virus.
We have a cluster of 5 players who have got it, and it's like our top scorer, our chief assists, our captain, our centre back, our centre midfielder. Away you go.
It would be like an epic version of Sunderland Till I Die, the inside story of the club that actually pushes that narrative on the external anyway. Back page of the Guardian is Tottenham player test positive for coronavirus, as you mentioned, and that West Indies story as well. They've opted out a trio of players anyway, have opted out of a tour of England over safety fears. That is the Guardian.
The Mail this morning, Bowes Park strife. Dublin side admit breaching ban on training 6 times. So it wasn't just that one time that they got photographed. Never admit that, lads. And Olympians' fight ends in victory. Ireland's Olympians have received tremendous boost with the news that health officials will grant exemptions from COVID-19 restrictions for the use of training facilities. And then close contact study gives Gaelic Games a huge boost. That's the news coming through from the Stat Sports survey. And then they also have a story about Shane McGrath profiling the Director General, who's leading by example in a crisis. So praise for Tom Ryan from Shane McGrath in the Mail today.
The back page of the Herald is Eoin goal. Dubs hero Merchant. Lockdown gives us a chance to recover, he says. Ross, no return for Old Guard at the FAI. Sports Minister Shane Ross has given his backing to the FAI board and says he won't allow the Old Guard to retain power at the association. And we'll do whatever it takes, says Klopp. Pool boss vows fans will have a celebration. And finally for me then, it is the Racing Post. Stars out at Newmarket, racing returns to flat headquarters, and roosters starting to crow. The NRL returned with a bang last week, but the enforced break appears to have served some sides better than others. So the competition's first round of fixtures since March 22, fitness was a big issue, and in the Racing Post, they've got a preview of the next round. We are going to take a quick break in a moment before we get to Gina Akpomoses. Just to tell you as well that the OTB Sports app is live right now. You can go onto the App Store, onto the Google Play Store, and you'll be able to grab that right now. It is available, brand new, sparkly. Ger Gilroy, have you downloaded it? Have you been scrolling through it over the last couple of days?
Yeah, it's been class. Just search OTB Sports on the app in the App Store, and you'll get it. Really good response from people so far. You can email us feedback@offtheball.com if you've got anything that you want to get off your chest. But to be honest, when you download it, you realise the amount of content that we create, and there's something for everybody. You can pick your favourite sports, you can personalise your content, so you just get whatever it is you want. We'll have live scores when live sport returns. There's an events tab where you can get tickets. You can nab tickets first. We will be having some app exclusives as well. We're going to put up the OTB Gold series, which has been broadcasting on OTB Sports Radio as its own podcast strand, and that'll be exclusive for app users. We also have a very, very big name interview coming your way, which we'll be making available first on the OTB Sports app. So get onto the Play Store or get onto the App Store and search OTB Sports, and you can download that for your delectation and goodness. Okay. Hours and hours of free fun.
Absolutely.